awareness program like this in the all universities, if that unions are requested for that. So because of that purpose, they are here today. So first, so today we have Dr. Prabhat Jayasinghe is the president UTA from Columbia University, and Dr. Harini Amasuriya, secretary UTA, she is from Open University, and Pavitra Kailadabadi, treasurer UTA, and also from Columbia University, and Mr. Dilip, they are at the Open University of Sri Lanka. And also we have Dr. Sanjeev Maitripala from Peradeniya University. He also visited with that team. So sometime, someone may feel that after this election, why we need this type of gathering, because the election, you all know that election manifestos and things. So after that, everything changed, and so why we still need this type of awareness program or like that. So two things I want to recall. One is everybody may read in the newspapers. That is about the Peradeniya University Vice Chancellor and the official. They invite the President, Excellency the Maitripala Sirisena, to open a building in the university. So that you may read in papers and protest. And he also himself not accept the invitation, and so that indicate that still we have to educate people, or still people are not changing from their style. So that is one thing. Another thing happened recently in a university in Sri Lanka, leading university. That is Teachers Association organized a book discussion. That was a member of that institution, or that Teachers Association write a book, and so the Teachers Association organized a book discussion. The resource person for that, two of them are senior lecturers with PhDs, and two of them are professors from Sri Lanka. Then that vice chancellor of that university, because since it's a public event and public also gather, we need to take permission that teachers union. So that the vice chancellor sent a two-line reply that it has been decided that this type of activities are not allowed within the university premises. So what type of activity? Discussion of a book. So that indicate the standard of so that vice chancellor reveals that she is the chair for about 4 years. So you can imagine that in the university, a book discussion is not allowed. Then you can imagine the status of that university. So with these these things are indicated or remind us still we have to go a long way. So with that introduction, anyway, we have normally at the end of that talk we may have a vote of thanks, but anyway, traveling from all the way from Colombo to here, so I thank them also for that long journey, because I was the JASTA president last year, and I never even asked. I never traveled to Colombo to attend the meeting there because of my family commitment and everything. So in that case, I welcome and I thank them for coming all the way. Yeah. So with that, with this following Albert Einstein comment, I hand over the session to the Buddha people. The Einstein that the world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. The world is a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. Thank you.
Well, in the first place, I thank Japan University Science Teachers Association for organizing this event. And I would like to thank Prince as well for that introduction, because it simply says the context in which we are holding this event, and then probably what is going on right around. And this is actually an open discussion. That's what we thought. We must have seen it in the invitation. It's not just a session where four of us came here and then we'll be show. It will be an open discussion. So we guess that, to initiate things, probably we may talk about few things and then hope you all will join, and then we have time until 12. So if you want to stay here and then discuss things until 12, we are more than happy to be engaged in that. So, you must have seen in the invitation, the title of this open discussion is actually challenges faced by academics in university academics in Northeast universities, North and the East. Well, there are so many challenges. So we thought we would point out a few things, a few aspects, and then, but it should not be limited to that. We can talk about anything relevant. So I will talk about politicization of the university governance, and then trade union activities in that context. Then after that, Harini will. Shall I leave it to you to say? Most probably, maybe she will look at it from a kind of woman academics point of view. And then Pavitra will talk about academic standards. We get our salary, but at the same time, we need to do justice to our salary, so she will probably do something about that. And then Dilip's one will be more kind of more intellectual type thing, because mine will be a typical trade union activist speech, right? And this one is about academic freedom and that type of stuff. So probably it's more related to the book discussion that has been scheduled for the afternoon. Anyway, very frankly, before we came here, we thought that we were going to address a gathering of say 100 or 200 academics, because we thought it's actually the whole Jaffna University academics. To see that there are only few, but not a problem at all. Because this low number, as we realize, is not just an accident. And it doesn't say that probably most of the academics are not interested in this type of stuff either. So I was just trying to realize why, because yesterday we came to know that it could be a low number. So it's not a surprise to see this number in this moment. Shall I tell you probably what happened to the discussion between two parties, us and then JESTA and then the other unions, within the last 2 months on this? Maybe a month or 1.5 months ago, JESTA, they said, well, you all can come here and then have a discussion, open discussion with our activists. We said yes, that goes ahead. So we decided a date, 24th of April. And then after that, maybe 2 weeks ago, president of the other union, JUTA, he called me and then he asked me whether UTA members would come to the Jaffna University. I was a bit surprised to hear that. I said yes, and we'll be coming there on 24th. And he said, well, he doesn't know and his union doesn't know. They don't know. Well, I said, okay, then we thought that it's for the whole university, I mean academics, the whole academics in Jaffna University, so why don't you discuss with just the president and officials. He said, okay. Then they discussed, maybe on the following day or probably that day itself, I can't remember. Then Justa called me again saying that, all right, so it will be a kind of joint effort and they will organize it jointly, or as I can remember, probably Justa said, you better organize it. Then we will participate in that. That's right. Okay. And then we had this out of the vacation. And after that we came back to work. Alright. And then probably 3 days ago, I think day before yesterday, or day before that. Again, president of the other union spoke to me over the phone. He said, he asked me whether we can postpone the event. I said, well, we can't do that really because we have been asked to come to Jaffna and then to participate in this event by you all. How can we postpone it? We can't postpone it. You better discuss with the other union. And then, if you think that we have to postpone it, and if there are reasons, then you all can do it. Well, the reasons were actually, by that time I came to know through another channel that this book launch was not allowed to happen in the university. Right? It wouldn't be, it would not be, it would not happen in the university. See, it was not allowed. And, alright, so then he said, well, they don't have time because there are so many other events. For instance, there's a workshop, so many things. So asked for a kind of postponement. I said, well, discuss with the other union, and then they discussed. And later on, I came to know that they withdrew from this. All right. So we thought, okay, still we would come. And then, interestingly, maybe day before yesterday, one of our members, I guess I can mention the name, Pavitra, got a call from somebody, and it was a kind of message from your VC. That person asked Pavitra whether you know who the VC is. I know you will be confused when you ask that question. And she or he, I don't know the person, messenger was asked to tell Pavitra that VC is one of Professor Kailasapathi's friend's niece. Right? We heard that, she heard that the UTA delegation would come to Jaffna, but before you come, you better know who the VC is. Okay, so it's really nice to see, nice to hear that you are so and so's friend's niece, madam. Still, we have decided to come. Because for us, you being, related to somebody or that type of stuff has nothing to do with our visit to Jaffna. This is an awareness program. We thought we would come here and then speak. And then interestingly, last night, one of our members got another call from one of the deans of Jaffna University. The message is, well, no, you came to Jaffna and then Justa is organizing something, right? Well, that member said, it's not Justa, yes, Justa is organizing it, but other academics are also attending it. The person said, no, it's just few academics, you will see that it will be a few academics. So, I'm not saying that probably the reason behind this low number is those things because I have no evidence to prove that, but if you look at these things, you can see that there is a kind of relevance. So probably there are few members here I think we have to thank Jasta for bringing those few people here in such a context. So don't worry about the number. We don't worry about the number. That's all right. We are happy with that number. Right? Okay. Actually, I wanted to start my speech with something else, but on seeing this low number and hearing that there would be a low number, I thought I would mention this. Okay. Let me ask you, as I said, I'm going to talk about the politicization of university government. A few things about that. Let me ask a few questions at the beginning. You don't have to answer these questions, and there are no simple answers either. Like, okay, what if your vice chancellor will ask you to sign for an advertisement in support of a presidential candidate, and this person is in power now, he is the president? What will you do? That's one question. You had to answer that question, probably a month or two ago. And another one is this. Suppose that you're in a certain department and then a relatively inexperienced and incapable person is going to be appointed as the head by the vice chancellor. What will you do? You can do a number of things. Right? Maybe you can simply oppose. You can oppose. Or probably you can form a group of people and then you can oppose that. Or sometimes you will just take time to see what the others will do. If most of the people will say yes, you will also join them. Or if most of the people will say no, or probably you will support the person who is going to be appointed as the head, because after all, he or she will be appointed as the head, so without his or her support, your life would be a bit hard. Or you can carry tales to the vice chancellor and then probably get some other personal benefits or something. Or probably you may keep quiet. There are a number of things that you can do. All these are possibilities. As being academics in not only North or East, probably in the other areas, we know that. Well, these are certain things that we can do. There are so many similar type of questions that we can ask, but no point of wasting time. We all can see that. Okay, what would be the answer? As a rigid, typical trade unionist would say that there are one or two answers. You better oppose. Either as an individual, but I'm not tempted to say that. There may be many answers to this question. A typical rigid trade unionist may not agree with me, but I would say the answer to this question, there are no simple one or two line answers. It varies depending on where you operate. Probably in Jaffna University, the answer to that question may be something else. In Rupuna or Colombo, it depends on the situation. Environment. Right? And more importantly, administration, they also know this. For instance, that collecting signatures for that advertisement, it actually happened. We know the previous UGC chairperson, she sent this letter to all the vice chancellors, to my knowledge. All the vice chancellors. But most of the vice chancellors in Colombo-based universities, they were a bit careful, they were cunning, I would say. They did not send letters to deans asking to collect signatures because they knew that something unpleasant would happen. See how different things are actually. But when it comes to North and East, well, those vice chancellors, knowing that it's relatively easy to get signatures, they send the letter to the deans. And again, between Jaffna and Eastern, there's a difference because Jaffna University academics decided not to sign. To my knowledge, you didn't sign. But in Eastern University, they signed. So you can see that things are complicated. And if you have a look at that advertisement which appeared in the newspaper, you can see a few interesting things. It's not probably directly relevant to the railway. it's not directly relevant, but still, you know, I would say that some of these, most of these people were probationary lecturers. You can see, you know, understand, you can easily influence them, probationary lecturers, asking them to sign. And some of these people, you know, they misspelled their names purposely. You know, Jaya Singh, my surname is Jaya Singh. I can write something like Jayasiri, Jayasuriya, you know, at first glance, nobody will identify it. Right? We came to know it actually that was done purposely, right? Some academics. And some didn't use their usual signature. Right? Some didn't use their usual signature. On the other hand, there were some people who mentioned just one name. Mostly to my knowledge in Sri Lanka, we don't have that kind of tradition to mention just one name. I mean, if I sign somewhere, just writing my name as Prabha means that I would like to hide, right, myself. Likewise, you can say they found various strategies. They had to sign, but still they found various strategies to sort things out. So it's clear that, you know, things are kind of complicated, so you may not have one-line or two-line answers to these questions. I will revisit this later. Let's have a look at how things happened in Jaffna University and also in most of the other universities during the last few years. Maybe if we talk about Jaffna University, you know it better than I do. Think of the council. You know the composition of the council. Right? It's actually half comes from the academic position holders in the university. The other half plus one, the majority I would say, are appointed members. They are appointed members by the authority, I would say authorities, minister. And in Jaffna University it was not different. So we know that those appointed members were actually people of one politician who had affiliations with the former government. Right? And then, I mean, there's a kind of simple mechanism there. We all know that this is not limited to Jaffna University, probably in the other universities also, because it's the same actually. Most of these appointed members, they have some pre-council meetings before they come for the proper council meeting. And they make decisions there. So beforehand they know the decisions to be made. I mean, you know, what we should do when we go to the council meeting. And they come here. And then Vice Chancellor is appointed by the government. Right? So it's Vice Chancellor is one of them. Majority plus the Vice Chancellor. Then you have other deans and other people, you know, for various reasons they also join the same group. And that's how decisions are made. And that's the beginning of this politicization of the university governance, really, I would say. So, all the decisions that are made are the decisions that the authorities make. That's how they do things. And then, when it comes to the appointment of the Vice Chancellor, again, you can see the link between the Vice Chancellor and the Council. It's mutual. Vice Chancellor helps the Council, and then Council helps the Vice Chancellor, and then eventually when it comes to the votes, well, it's easy, you simply lobby the people and you get the highest number of votes. Obvious, that can happen. And then through the UGC, now UGC has a kind of bad habit of sending all three names to the president. We know earlier, it was not the situation. UGC has to nominate one of these three names to the president as a formality, just a formality, you know, president will sign it. But now, no, they send all three names so that the president can select whoever he or she likes. That's how things are happening. And then appointing people to these academic positions as heads. You must have seen this in Jaffna University, right? Co-coordinators, directors, and then probably deans. Deans is an election. It's not an election, it's a selection, we know that. Because vice chancellors, they manipulate it. Right? And so, okay, these appointments, are based on political and personal preferences and links. We know that. It's not based on merit. It's not based on merit. Then, malpractices associated with recruitment. Academic staff. I saw in few documents prepared by JUSTA, there were a number of examples. There were people who had, awards and all this stuff, but the university recruited some people who graduated long ago, who had less qualifications. You all know these examples. And then recruiting non-academics, same thing. Probably, in a way, we don't have to waste time on this because you all know what happened. And finally, victimization of the academics and non-academics as well, right? Who were engaged in this trade union activities. Their career is in danger. We know that. Okay, so these are some of the things happened in Jaffna University. Not only Jaffna University, these things happened in other universities as well. Now you are listening to this. Now, we can actually think, while these things were happening, what did we do? That's kind of important question that we can ask ourselves. Right. Probably as individuals, maybe, as unions first. Now, for instance, in Jaffna University, there are few unions, 3 unions to my knowledge, and plus non-academics, 4. 3 unions of academics to my knowledge, right? Yeah. I have seen only JUSTA writing to the UGC asking to remove the VC and appoint a competent authority. They went to that extent. I mean, as an outsider, this is how I see things actually. I'm not saying whether it is right or wrong, no. This is how an outsider sees it. But then the other 2 unions, they were silent really for some reason. I mean, they are not defending the Vice Chancellor, but they are not saying that we had to remove the Vice Chancellor either. Right? So, I mean, various parties, they behave in various manner in that context. And non-academics, they wrote a strong letter to the UGC, and that appeared in Colombo Telegraph as well, to my knowledge. Right? And then as individuals, what did we do? Well, probably some people tried to swim upstream, but their life became hard, so they gave up. Still there may be some people, there are some people who swim upstream, actually we had to appreciate, we can see. And there were some people who simply kept silent, they kept quiet. Right? And some people, they need a change, but they wait until somebody else will bring about the change. That's another thing. Oh, the worst thing is actually, some people, they go behind those who have power. Now that's again a kind of simple chain, like Vice Chancellor is there and then deans will join that club. And then they have their henchmen, heads, they have their henchmen and so on. So they simply go behind those who have power and try to get some personal benefits. So you can see that people behave in a number of different ways. And then union leaders, as union activists, how did we behave while this politicization was going on in the university? I have seen some people in certain newspaper interviews, they give their name. They bring their career to the limelight. Their career will be in danger, and they are brave enough to mention their names in interviews, right? And then at the same time, some union activists, probably for some personal benefits, they keep quiet. They are not active. Maybe assuming that with the intention that you will get a kind of headship later, or your professor application is being processed, So there may be various reasons. For various reasons, probably we just keep quiet. Again, you can see, how people respond is not the same. It's not simply the same. And, okay, well, at this point, you would tell me probably, yes, this person is talking about these things and he came from Colombo and the others, they also came from Colombo, but probably they are not familiar with the context here. We are facing all sorts of problems here, so these people, how come, they are going to advise us. Well, I agree to a certain extent. That's why I said at the very beginning, there are no simple answers to these questions. I'm not asking you to oppose, that is the only solution. Still, I stress, still there are certain things that can be done. You can oppose in a number of different ways. You can do a number of things. And the most important thing at this point in time is that, things have changed a little bit. This is kind of debatable, like last year ago, what are the things that changed? To what extent? Well, that's a separate debate. But at least we can see certain things. Well, we know once there was kind of heavy political influence by certain fractions on the one hand, and on the other hand, there was this iron fist control of, military control. That was another one. And then probably within the recent 5 years or so, it was the influence of this certain political fractions or parties who had affiliations with the former government. I'm not saying that things have been sorted out 100%, but things are a bit different, you would agree with me. Right? And you can see, when you go to UGC, well, I'm not trying to give a kind of character certificates to any party, institution or individual, but things are a bit different. At least we can talk to them. They understand what you say. I'm not saying that they will give solutions to all these problems. So the point is this now. Now things have changed a little bit. And then we have to ask that question, really, do we have to stick to the same thing that we did actually in the past? Can't we rethink about these things? When this politicization is going on, right? When these things are going on, shouldn't we behave in a different manner as academics? Should we stick to the same behavior that we continue to have during the past few years, past number of years, I would say. Think of it. That's important. Okay, I think I simply want to speak to mainly two groups here. One group is maybe those who keep quiet, those who keep silent when these things are happening, or those who think that there must be a change and somebody else can bring about that change for us. The other people are those who go behind power as a solution. Well, for survival, you just go behind those who have power. But I don't think that none of these things will be a solution to this problem. What I'm trying to say is this. Now, suppose that Vice Chancellor is doing a kind of wrong thing in the sense that he or she will ask you to sign for an advertisement in support of one of the presidential candidates. Or Vice Chancellor is trying to appoint a kind of incapable person, inexperienced person as the head of the department. Well, oppose it. We can do it. We have the right of doing it. Vice Chancellor is just one of them. She or he is also an academic. And we need to think that Vice Chancellor is accountable to the university, this community. not to the authority. Vice Chancellor is appointed by the authority, that's right, President. But still, that person is accountable to the university community. So we can always question that. Faculty boards. I guess even yesterday I mentioned, when I was talking to my colleagues, most of the problems, maybe 50%, somebody said no, more than 50% of the problems in the university system can be sorted out if we are active in faculty boards, if we simply talk about these things in faculty board. But most of us are silent. We don't speak. We simply say yes to what the dean will say. No, you can question. We can question the dean's behavior. If the decision is wrong, if you think of certain things, say, dean will come up with something that will bring disrepute to the faculty, or something that will deteriorate the academic standards, or something that will cause damage to the academic freedom. We can question those. Dean is accountable to the faculty to a greater extent than the Vice Chancellor is expected to do so. Why? Because Dean is an elected position. We elect the Dean. We elect the Dean. So we can question, and Dean is expected to be accountable to the faculty. Hence, the same thing. You all can question. And probably the thing is, we think that, okay, only few people will question it, and then nothing will happen. Eventually your life will become hard, others will just keep quiet. That's the problem. If everybody will begin questioning, if everybody will join them, it's not difficult. I'll tell you one example. In Colombo, and you can't say that this example is from Colombo, you all can do this, I guess. It's a kind of very simple. The example is this. In Colombo, if you want, I can mention the department as well, political science. Vice Chancellor, then head's term came to an end. And then Vice Chancellor had to appoint somebody, and Vice Chancellor didn't want to appoint the same person. Because that person is not a guy who would say yes to everything that the Vice Chancellor would say. So Vice Chancellor wanted to appoint somebody else. But everybody in the department did not accept. They said, no, we are not interested. Eventually the Vice Chancellor had to give it to the same person. Can't we do that? We can. Yeah, Mavitra is reminding me to mention our dean's election. That's another thing. Don't you think that it's a waste of time? Otherwise I should say that. No, that's another thing. Yes, I'm from Colombo Management, she's also from that, both of us are from the same faculty. Well, I'll say maybe take 5 minutes. Another example. These examples are interesting. On the other hand, we can learn a lot from them. Our dean's term came to an end. And Vice Chancellor did not want to allow the election to happen because he knew that the person who is going to be elected is not a person that he knew. What he did was he appointed an acting dean. That's actually violation of the act. You can appoint an acting dean if the existing dean will retire, or kind of his term will come to an end unexpectedly, or if the person will fall ill in a situation like that. But if the dean's term will come to an end officially, then you can't simply appoint an acting dean. And this acting dean continued for 6 months. You won't believe. 6 months. And he didn't have faculty boards. He had just 2 or 3 faculty boards because he knew that we questioned actually. We questioned, and he said, well, you have no right to be the dean. So eventually he didn't hold the faculty boards. And it has come to a certain point where the Vice Chancellor had to hold the election. And then, okay, he was going to have the election, and he is the one actually who said that this is not an election, it could be a selection. He mentioned that. he asked all the heads of the department to come to his office, because technically only a head of the department and the former dean is eligible to be the next dean. So he asked them to come to his office and he said, this is going to be a selection, it's not an election. So acting dean was one of the heads. And he said, well, I want this person. The words that he used might be different, I don't know. Well, the idea was actually, I want this person. And if somebody else would be nominated in the dean's election, don't accept it. Withdraw. You know our heads, they just nodded their head and came back. They didn't say anything. There was no single head to question that. And they came back. But fortunately, among those heads, there was one person, the present day. We said, okay, why don't you run? We support, we suggest your name, we nominate you. She agreed. And that was a kind of interesting experience. And then before the election day, actually, he asked her to switch off her phone. Because we knew that even in the final moment, you may get a call from the Vice Chancellor and then he'll say something and then ask, don't do that. And then we sent her home. On the following day, she came for the election. And by that time, Vice Chancellor came to know. He had come to know that this kind of thing would happen. So a person who is going to be appointed, nominated and elected is not the person that he was. You know, he came. And then before the election, usually Vice Chancellor speaks. He spoke. What he said was not very different from what ITN and Rupawahini did just before the presidential election. It was totally biased. In favor of the person that he wanted. He kind of threatened that if you appoint somebody, his argument was this. Now, Vice Chancellor cannot work if you are not in good terms with the authorities. So in the same manner, deans cannot work if you are not on good terms with the Vice Chancellor, and therefore when you appoint a person, be careful. Something to that effect. But still we stuck to our same plan and we nominated the person. And eventually our person got 24 votes, his person got just 4 votes, including his vote. So actually it's 3. So there are ways and means and ways of getting things done really, so we all can do it. Don't give up. That's the most important thing. Don't give up. Assuming that we can't do it and to do something everybody else should help this and then we have to get together, right? But then if everybody will think in the same manner, you all can do it. If majority will think that we can do it, we can oppose, you all can do it. Okay. And I said, well, I just want to say something about those who go behind, those who have power. Well, we need to understand that because our administration system is somewhat different. Now, I may be a dean, but then I have to go back to my department. Most of the deans and the vice chancellors nowadays, you hardly find a person who can come to their department again and then act in the same manner because you abused your power while you were a vice chancellor or dean. You can't come back to your community again. It's difficult. Right? So we need to understand we may be vice chancellor for a certain period. Right? So going behind power, is not the solution actually. For survival, some people may do it. Alright, so I don't want to go beyond this. I would just say that this politicization, why do we worry about this in the first place? Well, I would say that it affects the academic standards. In one way or another, it affects the academic standards. Right? For instance, if you will recruit incapable people, inappropriate people, that is harmful. We know what will happen. Right? And then the priority in this politicization, the priority is not lifting academic standards. Basically, to keep people silent so that we can please the top. You can see what is happening not only in your university, I'm saying I'm from Colombo, well the same thing has happened during the past few years. Academic standards on a nosedive. Because the priorities are different. It's different. Right? Now, the book launch was scheduled to be held, this afternoon. Was cancelled. No, you may not agree with the contents in the book, that's a different thing, but academic freedom is that you have to let it happen. That's what a university is. If a university says that well, no, you can't hold these things, what are we going to do? Can we go and hold it in a police station? That's not the solution. I mean, who else will do it? As Prince asked at the beginning. Or in an army camp. So we need to understand, probably we may not agree with the contents of the book, that's a different thing, totally different thing. Entirely different thing. But still, we should let it happen. So one more thing actually. Now it has been cancelled, alright. What do we do? You can answer that question really. I will leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can sit and make my presentation because I came prepared for a presentation. But with the current setup, I'll manage with. Got ready for myself. So the title I have selected is Academic Freedom and Autonomy of Universities. I think this is a kind of a topic we have discussed over the years, especially during the leading to the trade status at the moment today. So when I was doing a very brief survey on how this idea of academic freedom was developed in the world, I found certain interesting kind of contributions. One of the papers I found was by Charles W. Eliot. He was the first president of Harvard College, and writing on the title of academic freedom to a magazine called Science, which was the Journal of American Association for Advancement of Science. He has written interesting stuff. And this was in 1907, more than a century ago. And I'm going to read a few quotes from his paper, and you will realize that these quotes are really kind of very familiar to us. Now I'll read some of the quotes. Now, the first one, even in colleges and universities, in those parts, a teacher holding unpopular opinion could until very recently hardly escape the alternative of silence or banishment. So, teachers holding unpopular opinion could hardly escape the alternative of silence or banishment. The teaching of history in schools and colleges is watched with great suspicion by the different parties in church and state. So that is one quote. And the second quote I am taking from the paper. In the institutions of higher education, the Board of Trustees is the body on whose discretion, good feeling and experience the securing of academic freedom now depends. So this Board of Trustees can be thought as kind of equivalent to, let's say, councils at the moment, right? But there are numerous boards that have everything to learn with regard to academic freedom. These barbarous boards exercise an arbitrary power of dismissal. They exclude from the teaching unpopular or dangerous subjects. So that's the second quote. And then another one. the faculty is much more likely to limit unduly the academic freedom of students than of teachers. I think that is also a kind of an interesting experience we all experience in our faculties. Now when it comes to academic freedom of teachers, we all say that, we respect that and, we try to hold them. But when it comes to academic freedom of students, the way we are dealing with that dimension is different. And another quote, there is another university authority who can, if he chooses, put limits to academic freedom for a time, the president. Now, president is the kind of equivalent of a vice chancellor of a university. So, that was the quote. And the last quote, perhaps, is this. The teacher must not be always giving out information. He must also have time to absorb. Now, this is also a kind of an aspect that was discussed under academic freedom. That means that, not only teaching, research is also important. So, you should give time not only to absorb, but not only to, provide information, but to absorb as well. So that was from the paper by Charles Eliot, and that appeared in Science in 1907. So I would like to quote again from another person, J.E. Crichton, and that was in 1930, and again from the same journal Science. And he was talking about the dismissal of Professor W.O. Fisher, the chair of political and social science at Wesleyan University. So this is what he says in his paper. A teacher who has served the institution for 20 years was summarily removed on grounds that are absolutely trivial and puerile. From various sources which seem reliable, the report comes that Professor Fisher's address at Hartford was not the cause of his dismissal, but that the real ground is to be found in the objection felt by the president, that means the vice chancellor, and some of the trustees of the college, that means the council of the college, to his political and social views. If this is so, it is only emphasized the fact that there has been a serious infringement of the principle of academic freedom. Now, that was in 1930. Sounds like very familiar. And he went on to say and bring out another dimension of academic freedom. Now, this is about disciplines. Physical science has fortunately no longer to fear any direct interference from outside authority. Physical science has fortunately no longer to fear any direct interference from outside authority. It is a long time since Galileo, and even the doctrine of evolution now calls out no protest from any quarter. For freedom of speech and of research cannot be limited to certain subjects. Science cannot exist half slave and half free. Now, I think the context within which he was talking is that, by that time, when it comes to natural sciences, physical sciences, you were kind of, exercising your kind of right to, expression and everything, while perhaps social sciences were still under a lot of external pressure. And then he goes on to say this. Money is needed by universities. Yet, if money is to be got for the institutions by the suppression of the truth, by setting any limitation whatever upon the freedom of the teachers to inquire or to announce the results of their inquiries, better 1,000 times that the institution should go out of existence. The end of a university is truth and the promotion of truth. So, if we take I mean, if we take this view seriously, and where he says that better 1,000 times that the institution should go out of existence if there is no academic freedom. I don't know how many kind of universities should be allowed to exist at this moment. I mean, if we take this statement seriously. And then I would like to quote from another paper that is again on academic freedom, and that was in 1973 by George Dahlgren, and he says, we can all appreciate the need for complete freedom for those who would speak out against the actions of the government. But what about those faculty who must speak out against the university as represented by its administration? I'll read it again. We can all appreciate the need for complete freedom for those who would speak out against the actions of the government. But what about those faculty who must speak out against the university as represented by its administration? Surely those of us who would speak out in attempting to improve our institutions should be accorded the same, if not more, protection than those who would criticize government as an institution. So this brings another dimension. Okay? So when it comes to academic freedom, it's not only about critiquing the government, but critiquing your own university itself is considered a part of academic freedom. And then Malviya, that is in 1988, again under academic freedom, writing to the magazine Nature, says this: academic freedom is vital for universities and must be preserved at all costs. What is academic freedom? It is the freedom granted to the academic community, within brackets, students and teachers, to pursue knowledge as they see best without being subjected to external pressure from the church, government or economic forces. Now, I selected this because it gives a kind of a expansion of this dialogue. Now, academic freedom is not only about teachers, it's about students as well. It's a right exercised by both parties, and it also says that it's the right to act without being subjected to external pressures from outside factors. And he goes on to identify the main kind of agents: church, government and economic forces. So this is within the, it is the kind of background within which academic freedom was kind of recognized internationally as international declarations. And there are many international declarations on academic freedom and autonomy. And the famous declaration is called the kind of Lima Declaration, which was the kind of a declaration adopted by World University Service in 1988. And the declaration is called Academic Freedom and Autonomy of Institutions of Higher Education. And based on that, there are kind of several regional now declarations on academic freedom and autonomy. And there are many other kind of agreements, but I will, from now on, concentrate more on Lima Declaration to discuss this further. Now we saw how this idea of academic freedom was kind of formulated and discussed in the history. And by the time when the international community recognized academic freedom as a kind of a well-organized thought and represented in declarations like Lima Declarations, there are special features now. By 1980s, when they presented the concept, there are special features. One main feature is that you identify academic freedom within the human rights discourse. So you identify academic freedom as a human right. So it's located, it's positioned in a rights discourse. And the second important feature of these kind of declarations and agreements is this. It identifies academic freedom within the discourse of the role of education and the responsibility of the state in education. So it is not a kind of an isolated concept that you discuss, but it is discussed and positioned within the broader framework of the role of education and the role of state in education. And the third dimension is academic freedom by this time is identified as a right common to the entire academic community, not only for students, not only for teachers, because by the time, for example, when this person wrote his article in 1907, he was presenting kind of, he was defining academic freedom for teachers and students separately. But by the time this international recognition was gained, the kind of academic freedom that is accepted is common for all. That is for the entire academic community. So what do we mean by academic community? Now, normally the kind of general understanding among us is that academic community means academics, but it is not. In the declaration, the academic community is defined as all those persons teaching, studying, doing research and working at an institution of higher education. So academic community includes students, teachers as well as non-academics. So academic freedom is a right that is that can be exercised by all members of the academic community. And these declarations identify academic freedom in kind of different ways. And this academic freedom is identified as consisting of several components. I will kind of try to present the main components. Now, academic freedom is the freedom. Academic freedom is the freedom to operate without interference or repression from the state or any other source. And it goes on to say that the freedom of members of the academic community, individually or collectively, in the pursuit, development and transmission of knowledge through research, study, discussion, documentation, production, creation, teaching, lecturing and writing. So one main component of academic freedom is the freedom of the academic members to pursue knowledge, to develop knowledge, to transmit knowledge without any interference. And the second important component of academic freedom is the right to exercise civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights recognized in the United Nations Covenants on Human Rights. So it's an additional dimension. Now, in the first dimension, we talk about the right of academic community to engage with academic work. And the second right, a part of academic freedom is the right to exercise civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights recognized in UN covenants. And the third component of academic freedom, the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, expression, assembly, association, as well as right to liberty and security of person and liberty of movement. Now, I think this is one important dimension of academic freedom we see being violated seriously at the moment. Academic freedom means the freedom of thought, the freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Maybe we can actually take the example of this book launch that is to be happen this afternoon within this context of defining academic freedom. It says freedom of thought, expression and assembly. And the next dimension of academic freedom is the right to form and join unions for the protection of the members of the academic community. So you have a right under academic freedom to join unions. I think we know that we have a right as teachers, but I think when it comes to students, according to the definition of academic freedom, students have a right to join unions. Now we know that within the entire university system, student unions are not now held. The elections are not held, and the unions are not functioning. So it's a part of academic freedom. And the next dimension, the right not to get dismissed without a fair hearing before a democratically elected body of the academic community. And the other dimension, freedom of expression of opinion on any national and international question. Now that is again a part of academic freedom. Now I think it is interesting to note that now, for example, if I am from the engineering faculty, now almost all my colleagues think that their kind of duty is to teach engineering, right? And then I would like to emphasize when I talk about academic freedom, to exercise my academic freedom within the kind of framework of technical teaching. But according to the kind of declaration, still you are supposed to express opinion in any national and international question. Now, if the academic community is not going to do that, who should do that? So I think because of this kind of lengthy kind of discourse over centuries, happened over centuries, has actually helped in developing these declarations. And when it comes to academic freedom of students, there are special references. I'll quote two of them. Special references to students in addition to the general rights. Now, I have mentioned the kind of general rights that are being given to the academic community, that includes student community, but there are special references for students. First one, state should provide adequate resources for students to pursue their studies. That's a part of academic freedom of students. And the second one, the university should guarantee the participation of students in their governing bodies, individually or collectively, to express opinions on any national and international question. So not only that we should, the university should provide space for students to participate in decision making in governing bodies. They should be allowed to express opinion on any national and international question. And this discourse on academic freedom goes on to identify the broader role of education. I will just read 4 components of the broader role identified by Lima Declaration. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and the sense of its dignity, and shall strengthen the respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms and peace. Second one, education shall enable all persons to participate effectively in the construction of a free and egalitarian society and promote understanding, tolerance and friendship among all nations and all racial, ethnic or religious groups. It's another role of education. Education shall promote mutual understanding, respect and equality between men and women. The part of education, the role of education. Education shall be a means to understand and contribute to the achievement of major goals of contemporary society, such as social equality, peace, equal development of all nations, and the protection of the environment. So, here again, this declaration provides us a kind of an enlightened, broader view of education. Now I think this can be the kind of framework that can be used even when we are thinking of discussing the responsibility of the academic community, because it is within this framework we have to play our role. And then it goes on to identify the role of universities. Now, first I talked about the role of education, role of universities. It's very interesting. Universities and academic communities have an obligation to pursue the fulfillment of economic, social, cultural, civil and political rights of people, and shall strive to prevent the misuse of science and technology to the detriment of those rights. So it's mentioned, a main role of university is to fulfill the obligation to pursue the fulfillment of economic, social, cultural, civil and political rights of people, and then shall strive to prevent the misuse of science and technology to the detriment of those rights. And it gets more interesting. Universities shall address themselves to the contemporary problems facing society. I don't know whether we are aware of these things. To this end, curricula of these institutions as well as their activities shall respond to the needs of the society at large. So when we are engaging with curriculum development, are we taking into consideration the kind of role of universities mentioned and accepted in these international forums? I'll read it again, because I found it really interesting. Universities shall address themselves to the contemporary problems facing the society. To this end, curricula of these institutions as well as their activities shall respond to the needs of the society at large. And the next one, universities should be critical of conditions of political repression and of violations of human rights within their own society. So, what I was trying to do is that I was trying to kind of give you a kind of overview of the discussion on academic freedom. It was ad hoc, and so it was not a kind of a proper survey of how the dialogue was evolved, but it evolved over centuries. And we have now internationally accepted declarations, defining what academic freedom is in very broad terms. So I think my proposal for all of you is to, in trade union language, is to use this as a tool. Of course, academic freedom is a key concept. I mean, without academic freedom, the university can't function. But even if we forget that, in trade union language, this is a useful tool, even when it comes to, I think, trade unions, who as, let's say, the academics of universities, or even students. Now, if I give, for example, now, FUTA was trying, I think, to address the issues of politicization, militarization, and even FUTA is thinking of, initiating a dialogue on the kind of social responsibility of academics. So, I think these international declarations on academic freedom gives us a kind of a broader framework for us to locate that dialogue. And when it comes to, I think, university academics, especially perhaps for the Jaffna University teachers, it provides a strong case to make Jaffna University a premises, university a premises that is kind of academic friendly, and where you can exercise your freedom of thought, expression and assembly. I mean, this is a good tool. It's internationally accepted. And when it comes to students also, to win back their rights, this provides students a good basis. So I think I'll stop there. Pavitra.